Many centuries ago, Samarkand was an important center on one of the branches of the so-called Great Silk Road. The network of ground transportation roads gradually lost its early significance after the discovery of the sea routes from Europe to Asia, but an idea of their revival has been circulated for some time. After the Russian colonial conquest of Samarkand in 1868, the city had two parts: the indigenous Old Town and the new Russian colonial city center. The backbone of the city was mile-long Abramov Boulevard that separated the Old Town from the colonial part. Renamed after the collapse of the USSR, the University Boulevard, it hosts a range of old and new buildings of the Samarkand State University, founded here in 1927. The latest and the most exotic addition to the existing array of colleges, faculties and administrative buildings is Confucius Square. It features a large bronze statue of the great philosopher erected on a massive pedestal next to one of the university's principal study blocks. This statue is flanked with two parallel wooden terraces, with benches and a marble gate separating the square from the boulevard and the main street. This impressive ensemble is not part of the Confucius Institute in Samarkand, but even more importantly, it signifies a change in the Chinese strategy in Uzbekistan. Until recently, the Chinese presence in the country was pragmatic and unspectacular. Cheap Chinese goods could be found everywhere, but their quality left much to be desired. The Confucius Institute came to Uzbekistan in 2005, and its office in Samarkand opened 8 years later, at the backyard of the Samarkand Institute of Foreign Languages in the northern part of the boulevard. It all changed in 2019. Now, the square and the statue of Confucius are located right in the center of Samarkand at the crossing of two important axes. Both axes have spatial and conceptual dimensions related to the complex narratives of the Silk Roads, colonialism and nation building. The longer axis is the University Boulevard and the shorter one is formed by two conspicuous buildings. The oldest of the two is St. Alexius Cathedral, built in the Turkestan colonial style in 1912 as the Samarkand Garrison Church. In the colonial period, the whole area around it was occupied by different offices of the military administration. Some of these are still there. In the Soviet time, the church was desecrated and turned into a club for a large army camp stationed there for a couple of decades. In 1989, the barracks were demolished, and 7 years later the cathedral was returned to the Russian Orthodox Church. The rest of the land was granted to the university for the construction of the tall building which today is seen behind Confucius statue. On the opposite side of the short axis stands another important landmark, the main building of the Samarkand State University. In late 1924, the newly formed Soviet Union carried out so-called national and territorial delimitation, creating national states as the Soviet republics. Samarkand was chosen as the first capital of the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic and remained so until 1930, when the capital was moved to Tashkent. These short 5 years saw the consolidation of the Soviet power in Uzbekistan as the state developed and implemented a range of ambitious cultural projects, including the creation of the Pedagogical Academy. Its constructivist building was designed by the architect Konstantin Tiltin and later became the center of a large university campus stretching along both sides of the boulevard in opposite directions. The colonial garrison church and the university therefore represent two almost opposite cultural paradigms that came to define the Russian and later the Soviet presence in Samarkand. Interestingly, both buildings have retained or recovered the same functions they had when they were constructed about a century ago. This provides the area a kind of permanent cultural reference framework. Although the landmarks on the longer axis also have colonial origins, they tell different stories of reinterpretation. Both have interesting connections with China. The first is the imposing, if somewhat garish, building constructed in 1895 for the local branch of the Russian Chinese Bank. The bank was established to promote Russian commercial and political interests in China. Over the centuries, the building changed owners several times. In the late 1970s, it apparently hosted the laboratory of cosmic rays. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, it served as the reception hall for the city council. For the last decade or so, it has been the head office of the Samarkand University rector. On the opposite, the southern end of the boulevard, stands a small mansion with an even more versatile history. It was designed by the biologist Mikhail Nevesky in the 1980s and served as his working office and residence. Nevesky made Samarkand the greenest city in Central Asia. He worked there for 30 years and left behind the green boulevard, several parks, botanical gardens, and a large chestnut grove in the mountains. All these have been completely or partly destroyed by the Uzbek government to make space for new construction projects. In the late 1920s, the mansion was home to Akhmal Ikramov, one of the key figures in the Uzbek Communist Party, who was arrested and executed in 1937. In 1995, the building was transferred to the newly established International Institute for Central Asian Studies, which owes its origin to UNESCO's several years of expeditions along the Great Silk Road. At that time, Central Asia was seen as a lost but now rediscovered heart of Asia, with a great historic model of intercultural dialogue already available, the Great Silk Road. The Institute has been working for over 20 years on the projects related to the history and culture along the Silk Roads. Although China had signed up to support the Institute, but very soon stopped taking any part in it, instead pursuing its own bilateral initiatives. One of these is the Confucius Institute, which until recently kept a rather low profile both in Tashkent and Samarkand. Initially, the Institute's activities were primarily focused on running Chinese language learning courses for Uzbek students wishing to be educated in China or to work for the Chinese investors in the Uzbek economy. There was a contrast between China's growing influence in the commercial and extractable resources market and its lack of engagement with arts, culture, and the society as a whole. The situation seems to be changing now. The statue of Confucius is proudly standing right in the center of cultural and civilizational crossroads. The ancient trade routes, a strong sense of regional identity, colonial narratives, and the Soviet nation-building project have generated a complex network of meanings. The sheer scale and strength of Chinese visual presence in Samarkand is the evidence not only of the Chinese efforts towards regional domination, but of some interest in genuine engagement and interaction. At the moment, it is unclear whether this interaction will ever go beyond ceremonial events tightly controlled by the governments on both sides. What is certain, however, is that the great culture represented by the statue of Confucius is facing exciting challenges in post-colonial Uzbekistan.